The blood-stained letter shook in Ruby Parker's trembling hands as she stumbled down the dusty main street of Sweetwater, Texas, in the summer of 1876. Townsfolk turned to stare at the disheveled young woman whose typically immaculate appearance had given way to wild-eyed desperation. Her chestnut hair had fallen loose from its pins, her dress was torn at the hem, and the normally composed schoolteacher looked like she'd seen the devil himself. "Please," Ruby called out, her voice cracking as she approached Sheriff Hanson outside the jailhouse. "My brother's in danger." "The Blackwell Gang has him," the sheriff, a portly man with a graying mustache who'd served Sweetwater for 20 years, took the letter from her hands and adjusted his spectacles. His expression shifted from concern to skepticism as he read. "Miss Parker," he said slowly, "this here's just a standard ransom note. Says they want $5,000 by week's end or your brother doesn't make it home." He handed it back to her. "But everybody knows your brother James left for California 3 weeks ago. Got on the westbound train myself." "No," Ruby insisted, clutching the letter. "That's what we told people, but he was investigating the Blackwell Gang for the newspaper in Austin. He was working undercover, and now they've discovered him." Sheriff Hanson exchanged glances with his deputy, both men's expressions softening with pity. "Miss Parker, we all know how hard it's been since your parents passed. But making up stories, I'm not making this up." Ruby's voice rose, drawing more onlookers. "The blood on this paper is my brother's. They sent a lock of his hair, too." She fumbled in her pocket, producing a small envelope. "See, they're holding him at the abandoned silver mine in Devil's Ridge," the sheriff sighed. "Miss Parker, that mine collapsed 2 years ago. Nobody could be hiding out there." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Why don't you go home and rest? Maybe visit Doc Morgan for something to calm your nerves." Ruby looked around desperately at the gathering crowd faces she'd known her entire life, parents of children she taught, neighbors who'd brought casseroles after her parents' funeral, all wearing the same expression, pitying disbelief. "I'm telling the truth," she pleaded, but the whispers had already started. Poor thing's finally cracked under the strain. Always was high-strung, just like her mother, teaching those children when she's having delusions. Tears of frustration burned Ruby's eyes as she backed away from their stares. The letter clutched to her chest was the only proof she had, and nobody would even consider it might be real. Her brother was running out of time, and she stood alone. As Ruby turned to leave, a tall figure stepped into her path. She nearly collided with a broad chest clad in a dusty denim shirt. Looking up, she found herself staring into the most intense blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath a worn Stetson. She'd never seen him before, would have remembered if she had. He wasn't from Sweetwater. "Pardon me, madam," he said, his voice low and measured with a slight drawl. He removed his hat, revealing dark blonde hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Name's Owen Whitlock. Couldn't help overhearing." "This Blackwell gang you mentioned, would that be Silas Blackwell's outfit?" Ruby nodded, surprised. "Yes. My brother was investigating their connection to the railroad robberies." The stranger's jaw tightened. He studied her face intently, then the blood-stained letter in her hands. "Sheriff," he called over her shoulder, "might want to reconsider dismissing the lady's concerns. Silas Blackwell is very real and very dangerous. I've been tracking him across 3 states. The sheriff's expression darkened. "And who exactly might you be to come telling me my business, mister?" Owen Whitlock reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a silver star. "U.S. Marshal, Sheriff, and unlike you, I believe every word this lady says." The crowd murmured in surprise. Ruby stared up at the Marshal, her heart pounding with sudden hope. "You do?" she whispered. His gaze held her steadily. "Yes, madam. And if your brother's been taken by Blackwell, We don't have much time." For the first time since receiving the terrible letter that morning, Ruby felt something besides despair. This stranger, this Marshal, believed her when no one else would. "Marshal, you can't seriously," the sheriff began. "I seriously can," Owen cut him off. "And I'd appreciate your cooperation, Sheriff. But with or without it, I'm going to help Miss Parker find her brother." He turned back to Ruby. "If you'll permit me, that is." Ruby nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She didn't know this man, but he was offering what no one else would, belief and help when she needed it most. "We'll need supplies," Owen said, his voice all business now. "And you'll need to tell me everything you know about your brother's investigation." "Thank you," Ruby managed at last. I don't know how to repay you." Something softened in the Marshal's eyes. "No need, Miss Parker. Just doing my job." He replaced his hat and offered his arm. "Now, let's get your brother back." The crowd parted as Owen Whitlock escorted Ruby down the street, away from the whispers and doubting stares. For the first time since finding the blood-spattered letter on her porch at dawn, Ruby Parker allowed herself to hope. What she couldn't know then was that this chance encounter with the quiet Marshal would change not just her brother's fate, but the entire course of her life. The mercantile store bell jangled as Ruby and Marshal Whitlock entered. Mr. Peterson looked up from his ledger, eyebrows rising at the sight of the town's schoolteacher on the arm of a stranger. "Ruby Parker," he greeted, curiosity evident in his voice. "What can I help you with today?" Before Ruby could respond, Owen stepped forward. "Need supplies for a 3-day ride. Jerky, coffee, hardtack, ammunition for a Winchester and a Colt .45. Mr. Peterson's gaze flicked between them. "Planning a trip, Miss Parker?" Ruby straightened her shoulders. "Yes, my brother is in trouble." "Now, Ruby," the storekeeper sighed, "the whole town's heard about your concerns. But making up stories about James won't bring him back sooner from California." Owen's voice cut through the air like a knife. "The lady isn't making up anything, sir. I'd appreciate it if you'd just fill our order." Mr. Peterson blinked at the Marshal's tone, then bustled to gather the requested items. While he worked, Ruby noticed Owen studying a map pinned to the wall. "Devil's Ridge is here," she said quietly, pointing to a spot about 40 miles northwest of town. "The old Redemption silver mine was abandoned after the collapse, but my brother's letter said there are still passable tunnels where they're holding him." Owen nodded, memorizing the location. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow." "Too dangerous to approach after dark, especially if they're expecting trouble." "Tomorrow," Ruby's heart sank. "But the note says they'll kill him if they don't have the money by Saturday. That's only 3 days from now." "Which gives us time to prepare properly," Owen replied. "Rushing in half-cocked will only get your brother killed faster, and possibly us along with him." She wanted to argue but knew he was right. James would need her thinking clearly, not panicking. Mr. Peterson returned with their supplies. "That'll be $8.45. Owen paid before Ruby could reach for her reticule. "I'll see the lady home," he informed the shopkeeper, whose eyebrows nearly reached his hairline. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Ruby adjusted her bonnet, acutely aware of the stares following them down the street. "They all think I've lost my mind," she said softly. "Does that matter right now?" Ruby considered this. "No, only James matters." Owen nodded approvingly. "My thoughts exactly. Now I need to check my gear at the hotel, and then I'd like to see that letter if you don't mind. Might give us some clues about what we're walking into." At Ruby's small cottage on the edge of town, she invited the Marshal inside with some trepidation. She'd never entertained a man alone in her home. It simply wasn't done for an unmarried woman of 22. But these were extraordinary circumstances. The cottage was modest but neat, with simple furnishings and shelves lined with books. Owen removed his hat as he entered, his gaze sweeping the room with professional assessment. "Please sit," Ruby offered, gesturing to a chair at her small dining table. She poured them each a glass of water from a pitcher. "The letter is here." Owen unfolded the bloodstained paper carefully. His expression remained neutral as he read, but Ruby noticed his knuckles whitening slightly. "You said your brother was investigating their connection to the railroad robberies." Ruby nodded. James was a journalist for the Austin Sentinel. He believed the Blackwell Gang had someone on the inside at the railroad company, feeding them information about gold shipments. She hesitated. He was also investigating rumors about their involvement in land grabs along the proposed route for the new Texas Central Line. Owen looked up sharply. Land grabs? Yes. Small ranchers and farmers being driven off their land through intimidation or worse. The land is then bought cheap by shell companies. Ruby twisted her hands together. James thought someone powerful was behind it all, someone respectable who would never be suspected of working with outlaws. The Marshal rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Your brother was digging into something dangerous. No wonder the gang took him. He studied the letter again. This meet-up location they've specified for the ransom hangman's draw, is it marked on any maps? Ruby shook her head. It's a local name for a gulch about 10 miles east of Devil's Ridge. James and I used to ride out that way as children. Good. That knowledge gives us an advantage. Owen refolded the letter. Miss Parker, I need to be clear about something. Rescuing your brother will be dangerous. I can't guarantee your safety if you come along. Ruby lifted her chin. I'm coming, Marshal Whitlock. James is all the family I have left. Besides, I know the terrain better than you do. A hint of admiration flickered in his eyes. Fair enough. But you'll follow my instructions without question. One wrong move out there could get us all killed. I understand. Owen nodded, satisfied. Tell me about your brother. What does he look like? Any distinguishing features that would help us identify him quickly? He's 26, about your height but slimmer build. Dark brown hair like mine, green eyes. He has a small scar through his right eyebrow from a childhood fall. Ruby smiled sadly. He's always been the brave one, charging into danger while I stayed safe with my books. Seems to me you're plenty brave yourself, Miss Parker. Owen's voice had softened. Not many would risk riding into an outlaw hideout. Ruby felt heat rise to her cheeks at his assessment. I'm terrified, actually, but fear won't save James. That's the definition of courage. Owen stood, placing his hat back on. I should go. Need to check my weapons and rest before tomorrow. Be ready at dawn, wear practical clothing, and bring only what you absolutely need. At the door, he paused. Lock this behind me and keep your shotgun close tonight. If Blackwell has spies in town, they know you received their message. They might be watching. The thought sent a chill down Ruby's spine. Do you really think they'd come here? I think it's better to be cautious. His blue eyes held hers. I'll be back at first light, Miss Parker. After he left, Ruby secured the door and moved to the window, watching his tall figure stride down the path. Only then did she realize her hands were trembling again, not from fear this time, but from something else entirely. Dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon when Ruby heard the soft knock at her door. She'd been awake for hours, too anxious to sleep more than fitfully. Dressed in her most practical skirt and blouse, with sturdy boots and her wide-brimmed riding hat, she carried only a small pack with essentials. Owen Whitlock stood on her porch, looking rested and alert despite the early hour. His appraising glance took in her practical attire and the rifle she carried. You know how to use that? He asked, nodding toward the weapon. My father taught both James and me. I'm a fair shot. Good. Let's hope you don't need to prove it. He gestured toward two horses waiting at her gate. "I borrowed a mount for you from the livery. Owner wasn't too happy about it when I told him who it was for." Ruby's cheeks burned. "I imagine not, given what people are saying about me." "People talk too much and think too little," Owen said dismissively. "Ready." The town was still quiet as they rode out, though Ruby noticed curtains twitching as they passed. Word of her delusions had spread quickly. She held her head high, focusing on the road ahead rather than the pitying stares behind. Once beyond the town limits, Owen set a steady pace northwest. The summer morning was already growing warm, the Texas sun relentless even this early. Ruby was grateful for her hat and the canteen Owen had provided. "Have you been a marshal long?" she asked, breaking the companionable silence after several miles. Owen glanced her way. 5 years officially. Worked as a deputy before that in several counties. "Is that how you know about Silas Blackwell?" A shadow crossed his face. "Partly. I've been tracking his gang for the past 8 months, ever since they hit a mail train in Colorado. 3 guards killed, including a friend of mine." He adjusted his hat. "But I knew of Blackwell before that. His reputation reaches far." "You said you've tracked him across 3 states, Colorado, New Mexico, and now Texas. He's careful, never stays in one place too long, works through intermediaries. Most lawmen don't even believe he exists anymore. Like our sheriff," Ruby said bitterly. "Most sheriffs are concerned with keeping peace in their towns, not chasing ghosts across state lines." Owen's tone was matter of fact, not condemning, but Blackwell is real enough, and dangerous. "Why does a U.S. Marshal care about railroad robberies? Isn't that usually a job for Pinkerton detectives?" Owen gave her an approving look. "Good question. The railroads did hire Pinkertons initially. But after those detectives started turning up dead some in particularly gruesome ways, the federal government took interest. There's more at stake than just gold shipments." James thought so too. "In his last letter to me before he disappeared, he mentioned something about government land grants and political connections." Ruby frowned. "But he was being deliberately vague, said it wasn't safe to put everything in writing." "Your brother sounds like a smart man." "He is. Too smart sometimes for his own good." They rode in silence for a while, the landscape gradually changing from flat farmland to rolling hills dotted with mesquite and scrub oak. The heat shimmered over the ground in waves. Around midday, Owen led them to a small creek shaded by cottonwoods. "We'll rest the horses and eat something," he said, dismounting. "Still have about 20 miles to cover before nightfall." Ruby slid from her saddle, her legs stiff from the unaccustomed hours of riding. She splashed cool water on her face while Owen saw to the horses. "You ride well," he commented, handing her some jerky and hardtack. "I used to ride often before my parents died." Ruby leaned against a tree trunk. "After, there was the school to manage, the house to keep up. I sold our horses last year." The admission felt like a betrayal somehow, as if she'd given up a part of herself. Owen nodded in understanding. "Teaching suits you." "I love my students," Ruby answered honestly. "Though I sometimes wonder if I chose it because it was expected, not because it was my dream." "What would you have done otherwise?" The question caught her off guard. Few had ever asked about her dreams. "I wanted to write like James, maybe travel." She smiled ruefully. "Foolish notions for a woman alone." "I don't see anything foolish about it," Owen replied simply. Before Ruby could respond, he tensed, his hand moving to his holster. "Don't move," he said quietly. Ruby froze, her heart pounding. "What is it, riders? Coming fast." Owen was on his feet in one fluid motion, drawing his revolver. "Get behind those rocks, now." Ruby scrambled to obey, crouching behind a large boulder as Owen positioned himself with a clear view of the creek crossing. She could hear it now, too, the drumming of hooves approaching rapidly. 3 riders appeared, pulling up short when they spotted Owen. Ruby recognized one immediately: Frank Dawson, a ranch hand from the Circle D outside Sweetwater. "Well now," drawled the leader, a hard-faced man with a scar down one cheek. "What have we here? A lawman out for a pleasure ride?" His eyes narrowed at the badge visible on Owen's vest. "Just passing through," Owen replied evenly, his gun held casually at his side but ready. "Something I can help you gentlemen with?" The scarred man spat tobacco juice. "Depends. You traveling alone, Marshal? Do I look like I'm hosting a party?" Owen's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Funny thing," the man continued, ignoring Owen's tone, "we heard a Marshal rode into Sweetwater yesterday. Got real friendly with a local gal whose brother's gone missing. School teacher, they say." Ruby's blood ran cold. They knew. Somehow they already knew about Owen helping her. "News travels fast in small towns," Owen remarked. "Now, if you'll excuse me—" "See, that's the problem," interrupted the man. "Our boss doesn't like nosy lawmen or meddling schoolteachers. Sent us to deliver a message." All 3 men reached for their weapons, but Owen was faster. His first shot caught the scarred leader in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The second rider fired wildly as his horse reared, the bullet splintering bark inches from Ruby's head. Owen dove for cover as the remaining riders opened fire. From her position, Ruby could see the third man, Frank Dawson, circling to flank Owen's position. Without thinking, she raised her rifle and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough to startle Dawson and alert Owen to the danger. The Marshal rolled to one knee and fired twice in rapid succession. Dawson clutched his leg with a howl of pain as his horse bolted. The second rider, seeing his companions wounded, wheeled his mount around and fled, dragging the scarred leader's horse behind him. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Owen approached Ruby, his expression grim. "You all right?" She nodded shakily. "That was Frank Dawson. He works at a ranch near Sweetwater. I've known him for years." "Which confirms they have people watching the town." Owen holstered his weapon. "We need to move. They'll be back with reinforcements." They gathered their supplies quickly. As Ruby mounted her horse, she glanced at Owen. "I recognized one, but not the others." The leader was Jeb Harker, Blackwell's second in command. Owen's jaw tightened. "Mean as they come. I've been after him almost as long as Blackwell. You knew who they were right away, didn't you?" "That's why you were ready." Owen nodded grimly. "Recognized Harker. The fact he came himself means Blackwell is taking your brother's capture and your rescue attempt very seriously." "Is that good or bad for James?" "Both. It means he's still alive and valuable to them. But it also means they won't give him up without a fight." Owen checked his pocket watch. "We need to change course. They'll expect us to head straight for Devil's Ridge." "But James, we'll still get to him," Owen assured her. "Just not by the route they're expecting. There's an old trail through Apache Pass that will bring us to the mine from the north instead of the west." "That adds miles to our journey," Ruby protested, "and increases our chances of getting there alive," Owen countered firmly. "Trust me, Miss Parker. I want to save your brother too, but we can't help him if we're dead." Ruby swallowed her objections, knowing he was right. "I do trust you," she admitted. "I just can't bear thinking of James suffering while we take the long way around." Something in Owen's expression softened. "I understand. More than you know." He wheeled his horse eastward. "Let's ride. We'll make up time where we can." They pushed hard through the afternoon, the terrain growing increasingly rugged as they left the well-traveled roads. Ruby's muscles ached from the unaccustomed exertion, but she refused to complain. Every mile brought them closer to James. As dusk approached, Owen led them into a narrow canyon where a small spring bubbled from the rocks. "We'll camp here," he decided. Defensible position, water for the horses. We'll start again before dawn. Ruby dismounted stiffly, trying not to wince as her feet hit the ground. Owen pretended not to notice her discomfort, allowing her dignity, but she caught him watching with concern as she struggled to unstrap her bedroll. "Let me," he offered, taking the bundle from her hands. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through Ruby despite her exhaustion. "Thank you," she murmured, "for all of this. Most men would have dismissed me like the sheriff did." Owen arranged their small camp efficiently before answering. "I'm not most men, Miss Parker." "I've noticed," Ruby said softly. Then, feeling suddenly shy, she added, "And please call me Ruby. After saving my life, I think we can dispense with formalities." A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. "Ruby, then." He built a small, nearly smokeless fire and set coffee to brew. "And you should call me Owen." "How did you become a marshal, Owen?" Ruby asked as they shared a simple meal of jerky and biscuits. He studied the flames for a moment. "My father was a sheriff in a small town in Colorado. Good man, fair. Taught me that the law matters, but justice matters more." A shadow crossed his face. "He was killed trying to stop a bank robbery when I was 17. My mother had died years before, so I was on my own." "I'm sorry," Ruby said quietly, recognizing the grief that still lingered in his voice. "My parents died of fever 3 years ago within weeks of each other. If not for James, I don't know how I would have managed." "Family's precious," Owen agreed. "After my father died, I drifted for a while. Did some ranch work, then became a deputy in Wyoming Territory. The marshal there took an interest in me, became something of a mentor. When he recommended me for the marshal's service, it felt right. A way to honor my father. And now you hunt men like Blackwell. Men who think they're above the law. Men who hurt innocent people for profit or pleasure." Owen's voice hardened. "Yes, that's what I do." "Is it lonely?" Ruby asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that was inappropriate." "It's honest," Owen replied, surprising her. "And yes, it can be." Long stretches on the trail, moving from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. He poured more coffee into their cups. "What about you? Is teaching lonely?" Ruby considered this. "Sometimes. I have colleagues, friends in town, but since James left." She stared into her cup. "People see me as the schoolteacher. It's a role with certain expectations attached. Keep to yourself, set an example, don't show too much personality." She smiled wryly. "And definitely don't go chasing after outlaws with handsome marshals." Owen's eyebrows rose at the word handsome, and Ruby felt her cheeks flush. Before either could address her slip, a distant coyote howled, reminding them of their precarious situation. "We should get some rest," Owen said, standing. "Dawn comes early." He arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining propriety despite their unusual circumstances. As Ruby settled under her blanket, she watched Owen check his weapons one final time before stretching out, his hat tilted over his eyes but his posture still vigilant. "Owen," she asked softly. Thank you for believing me when no one else would." In the firelight, she saw him lift his hat slightly to look at her. "Get some sleep, Ruby. Tomorrow will be harder than today." Despite her exhaustion, Ruby lay awake long after Owen's breathing had deepened into sleep. The stars spread across the Texas sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet, indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath them. Somewhere out there, James was a prisoner, perhaps injured, certainly afraid. And here she was, feeling inexplicably drawn to a man she'd known less than 2 days. "Fear," she told herself, "that's all it is. Fear and gratitude making me emotional." But as sleep finally claimed her, Ruby knew it was more than that. Much more. True to his word, Owen woke her before dawn. They ate a cold breakfast, packed quickly and were riding while the eastern sky was still more purple than blue. The air held the promise of another scorching day. "How far to Devil's Ridge?" Ruby asked as they navigated a rocky slope. "If we push hard, we can reach the northern approach by dusk. We'll scout the mine entrance tonight and make our move at first light tomorrow." "That's cutting it close to their deadline." Owen nodded grimly. "I know, but rushing in without knowing what we're facing would be suicide." They rode in companionable silence for several hours, the landscape growing increasingly barren and rugged. By midday, heat radiated from the rocks in shimmering waves. Ruby's throat felt parched despite careful rationing of water. Owen called a brief halt in the shadow of a mesa, more for the horses' sake than their own. As Ruby stretched her aching legs, she noticed him studying the horizon with a frown. "What is it?" "Dust cloud." He pointed southwest. "Riders moving fast. Could be nothing." "Or it could be Harker and his men," Ruby finished, anxiety churning in her stomach. Owen nodded. "We should move. Stay close to the mesa's shadow as long as possible." They rode hard through the afternoon, the distant dust cloud sometimes visible, sometimes disappearing behind the rolling terrain. Ruby's mount was tiring, and she knew Owen was pushing his gelding to its limits as well. As the sun began its westward descent, they crested a ridge and Owen suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. Below them stretched a vast, rocky basin. At the far end, carved into the red stone cliff face, was the dark mouth of the abandoned redemption mine. "Devil's Ridge," Owen murmured. "And there's your brother's prison." Ruby's heart raced at the sight. "We made it." "Not quite yet." Owen pointed to movement near the mine entrance. "Look there. At least 4 men guarding the approach, and those buildings to the left, that's their camp." Ruby squinted in the fading light. She could make out several ramshackle structures that might once have been miners' quarters. Horses were picketed nearby, and she counted at least 6 men moving around the camp. "That's more than I expected," she admitted, her hope faltering. "More than I'd like," Owen agreed, "but not insurmountable." He studied the terrain carefully. "See that arroyo to the north? It runs behind those buildings. We can use it for cover." The sharp crack of a rifle shot cut through the air. Dirt kicked up inches from Owen's boot. "Down!" he shouted, yanking Ruby from her saddle as another shot whined past. They tumbled behind a boulder as bullets peppered the ground around them. The horses bolted in panic, disappearing down the slope. "Damn it," Owen growled, drawing his revolver. "They must have spotted us while we were watching the camp." Ruby pressed against the rock, heart hammering. "What do we do now?" Owen peered carefully around the boulder, then jerked back as another shot chipped stone near his face. "2 shooters on the ridge above us," he reported grimly. "They have the high ground. Can we make a run for it? They'd cut us down before we covered 10 yards. Owen checked his ammunition. "We need a distraction." As if in answer to his words, a tremendous explosion suddenly rocked the basin. Ruby gasped as one of the buildings near the mine entrance erupted in flames. "What the—" Owen risked another look. "Someone's attacking the camp from the south." Gunfire erupted below as the outlaws scrambled to defend against this new threat. Their hidden snipers abandoned their position, rushing toward the chaos. "This is our chance," Owen said urgently. "The arroyo, we can reach it if we move now." Hand in hand, they scrambled down the rocky slope, keeping low. Ruby's skirt caught on sharp rocks, tearing, but she barely noticed. Her focus narrowed to putting one foot in front of the other, following Owen's lead as bullets occasionally zinged past. They half slid down the last incline into the deep, dry stream bed of the arroyo. Owen pulled Ruby against the earthen wall as they caught their breath. "Who's attacking them?" Ruby whispered. "I don't know," Owen admitted. Could be a rival gang, could be someone with the same idea we had. His expression was grim. Whoever it is, they've given us an opening. The guards will be focused on the southern threat. We can approach from this direction and maybe slip inside while they're distracted. Ruby nodded, trying to ignore her trembling limbs. What's the plan once we're inside? Find your brother and get out. Owen checked his weapons again. These old mines usually have multiple tunnels. There might be another exit we can use. They followed the arroyo as it curved around toward the base of the cliff. The gunfire continued sporadically from the direction of the camp. As they drew closer to the mine entrance, Ruby could see figures moving in the gathering darkness, outlaws taking up defensive positions. "Stay close," Owen whispered. "When I give the signal, we run for that equipment shed beside the mine entrance. It's our best cover." Ruby nodded, gathering her torn skirt in one hand to prevent tripping. Her other hand gripped her rifle. "Now," Owen hissed, and they burst from the arroyo, sprinting across the open ground. 50 yards of exposed terrain had never seemed so vast. Ruby's lungs burned, her boots slipping on loose shale. Ahead, the abandoned shed grew tantalizingly closer. Behind them, a shout indicated they'd been spotted. Bullets kicked up dust at their heels. Owen grabbed Ruby's arm, practically dragging her the last few yards as gunfire erupted around them. They crashed through the shed's rotting door, tumbling into its dusty interior. "You hit," Owen demanded, his hands running quickly over her arms and shoulders, checking for wounds. "No," Ruby gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "You grazed my side, nothing serious." Owen peered through a crack in the wooden wall. "They know we're here, but they're still dealing with whoever hit them from the south. We need to move before they regroup." The shed backed directly against the cliff face, with only a few yards separating it from the mine entrance. Owen pointed to a narrow gap between boulders that would provide cover for most of the distance. "Ready?" he asked, his blue eyes intense in the dim light. Ruby nodded, summoning her remaining courage. "For James." "For James," Owen agreed. They slipped out the back of the shed and into the shadow of the rocks. The main entrance to the redemption mine gaped before them, a black maw carved into the red stone. No guards were visible, having apparently been called to defend against the attack on the camp. Inside, the mine tunnel was cool and damp after the desert heat. Owen struck a match, revealing a rough-hewn passage that extended into darkness. Ancient support timbers, many rotting and sagging, lined the walls. The air smelled of dust and something else, a metallic scent that made Ruby's stomach clench. "Blood," Owen confirmed in a whisper, noticing her reaction. "Someone's been hurt in here." They moved cautiously forward, guided by the occasional match. The main tunnel branched several times, but Owen kept them on the widest path, reasoning it was most likely to lead to areas still in use. A faint glow appeared ahead, growing stronger as they approached. Voices echoed from around a bend in the tunnel. Owen extinguished his match and drew his revolver, motioning for Ruby to stay behind him. They edged forward until they could peer around the corner. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, illuminated by several lanterns. Mining equipment lay scattered about, and rough sleeping pallets lined one wall. But what caught Ruby's attention was the figure slumped against the far wall, hands bound behind his back. "James," she breathed, recognizing her brother despite his battered condition. 2 men guarded him, both armed with shotguns. They looked nervous, clearly aware of the commotion outside but unwilling to abandon their prisoner. Owen pulled Ruby back from the corner. "I count 2 guards," he whispered, "but there could be more in adjoining tunnels. I need you to create a distraction." "What kind of distraction?" "When I give the signal, fire 2 shots down that side tunnel." Owen pointed to a dark opening nearby. Make them think we're coming from another direction. When they react, I'll take them out." Ruby nodded, her mouth dry with fear. She positioned herself near the side tunnel, rifle ready. Owen held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. Ruby fired twice in rapid succession, the rifle's report deafening in the confined space. Shouts of alarm erupted from the chamber. "They're coming through the north tunnel," one guard yelled. Owen was already moving, rounding the corner with his revolver raised. 2 shots echoed, followed by a cry of pain and the clatter of a dropped weapon. "Ruby, now," Owen called. She rushed forward to find one guard down, clutching a bleeding shoulder while Owen held the second at gunpoint. James was struggling to sit up, his face a mess of bruises but unmistakably alive. "James," Ruby cried, rushing to her brother's side. "We're here to get you out." "Ruby." James's voice was hoarse with disbelief. "How? What are you doing here?" "Saving your stubborn hide," she said, tears blurring her vision as she worked to untie his bonds. With Marshal Whitlock's help, Owen was securing the uninjured guard with his own belt, having already disarmed both men. "How many more in the mine?" he demanded. The man spat defiantly. "Enough to kill you 3 times over, lawman." "We need to move," Owen said, turning to Ruby and James. "Can he walk?" James struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Ruby. "I can manage," he insisted, though his face was gray with pain. "They worked me over pretty good, but nothing's broken." "They were asking about my notes," James explained as they made their way back toward the entrance, Owen leading with his revolver ready. "Wanted to know who else I'd told about their operation. I wouldn't talk, so they sent that ransom note, figuring you'd either pay up or I'd break eventually." "Who's attacking the camp?" Owen asked. "Did you hear anything?" James shook his head. "Just the explosion and gunfire. The guards were as surprised as I was. They reached the main tunnel intersection when a voice called from behind them. That's far enough." They turned to find Jeb Harker blocking the passage, his arm in a crude sling from Owen's shot the previous day, but his gun hand steady. Behind him stood 3 more armed men. Well, Harker drawled, his scarred face twisted in a malicious smile. "If it ain't the heroic Marshal and the schoolteacher, come to save the nosy reporter." His cold eyes fixed on Owen. "Whitlock, Silas said you might be the one causing trouble. He'll be pleased when I bring him your head." "Where is Blackwell?" Owen demanded, his voice leveled despite the dire situation. "Too cowardly to face me himself." Harker's smile vanished. "Silas Blackwell answers to no one, especially not some government badge toter. He's already halfway to Mexico with the plans." "What plans?" Ruby asked, trying to buy time as she felt Owen shifting slightly beside her. "None of your business, lady, but your brother was getting too close to things bigger than he understood." Harker raised his pistol. "Now, drop your weapons," or a deafening explosion rocked the tunnel, sending dust and small rocks showering down. Everyone staggered as the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. "The support beams," James shouted. "The old dynamite charges, someone set them off." Horror dawned on Harker's face. "The whole damn mine's coming down." As if to confirm his words, a sickening crack sounded overhead as one of the ancient support timbers split. The outlaws turned and fled deeper into the mine as more beams began to give way. "The entrance!" Owen shouted, grabbing Ruby's arm with one hand and supporting James with the other. "Run!" They stumbled forward as the tunnel behind them collapsed with a thunderous roar. Dust billowed around them, choking and blinding. Ruby could barely see Owen's form ahead, pulling her along as she helped James stagger forward. A massive timber crashed down just behind them, narrowly missing James. The rumbling grew louder, the very mountain seeming to shake itself apart around them. "There." Owen pointed ahead to a faint glow, the entrance. still open but visibly shrinking as the collapse progressed. With a final desperate surge, they burst out into the night air, tumbling down the slope as the mine entrance disintegrated behind them in a cloud of dust and debris. The roar of the collapse gradually subsided, leaving an eerie silence broken only by their gasping breaths and distant gunfire from the camp. "You all right?" Owen asked, his voice rough with dust as he helped Ruby to her feet. She nodded, then turned to James, who lay on his side, coughing violently. "James, can you stand? Give me a minute," he wheezed, struggling to sit up. Owen scanned their surroundings. The chaos at the outlaw camp continued, but it was only a matter of time before someone noticed their escape. "We need to find cover," he said urgently. "The arroyo, if we can reach it, we can follow it away from here." Supporting James between them, they made their halting way across the open ground toward the dry stream bed. Every step was agony for James, whose injuries were clearly worse than he'd admitted. They had almost reached the arroyo when a bullet kicked up dirt at their feet. Turning, Ruby saw 3 riders approaching fast from the direction of the camp. "Go!" Owen pushed them toward the arroyo's edge. "Get down there. I'll hold them off." "Owen, no," Ruby protested. "No time to argue. Get your brother to safety." Owen was already raising his rifle, taking aim at the approaching riders. Ruby and James half slid down the steep bank into the arroyo as gunfire erupted above them. From their position, Ruby could see Owen taking cover behind a boulder, exchanging shots with the outlaws. "We can't leave him," she said desperately. "We're not," James assured her, his voice stronger now that they'd stopped moving. He drew a small revolver from inside his boot, a hideaway weapon the outlaws had missed when capturing him. "Help me up the bank. We'll flank them." Ruby hesitated only a moment before nodding. Together, they crept along the arroyo until they were behind the rider's position. With Ruby's help, James climbed painfully up the bank. He steadied his hand against a rock and took careful aim. His first shot caught one outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse. The others whirled in confusion, suddenly caught between 2 lines of fire. Owen seized the opportunity, dropping a second man with a clean shot. The third rider, realizing he was outmatched, wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward the camp. Owen hurried to join Ruby and James. "Quick thinking," he told James with genuine admiration. "But we need to move before he brings reinforcements." "Who's attacking the camp?" Ruby asked as they made their way along the arroyo, moving as quickly as James's condition allowed. "Saw the badge when I was up there," Owen replied. "Texas Rangers. Must have been tracking Blackwell's gang too." "That explains the explosions," James said. "Rangers aren't known for subtlety." They followed the arroyo for nearly a mile before Owen deemed it safe to emerge. The sounds of battle had faded behind them, though an orange glow on the horizon suggested the outlaw camp was burning. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles east of here," James said, pointing weakly. "Used by cattle outfits during roundups. Should be abandoned this time of year." "Can you make it that far?" Ruby asked worriedly, noting how heavily he leaned on her. "Don't have much choice, do I?" James attempted a smile that became a grimace of pain. The journey to the line shack was slow and arduous. James's strength was fading fast, and twice they had to stop and let him rest. The night grew cold, as desert nights often did, and Ruby shivered in her torn dress. Without a word, Owen removed his coat and placed it around her shoulders. The garment was warm from his body, carrying his scent of leather and gunpowder. "Thank you," she murmured, touched by the gesture. "We look after each other," he replied simply. The line shack, when they finally reached it, was little more than a 1-room structure with a sagging roof and dirt floor, but it offered shelter and relative safety. Owen checked it carefully, before allowing Ruby and James inside. "No one's been here in months," he reported, lighting a small oil lamp he found on a crude shelf. The meager light revealed a rustic table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. They helped James to the cot, where he collapsed with a groan of relief. Ruby examined him by lamplight, dismayed by what she found. His face was bruised and swollen, dried blood caked in his hair from a head wound. When she carefully lifted his shirt, she gasped at the dark bruising across his ribs. "Oh, James," she whispered, fighting tears. "Looks worse than it is," he insisted weakly. "Nothing some rest won't fix." Owen rummaged through the sparse supplies left in the shack, finding a canteen with a small amount of water and some ancient coffee grounds. He offered the water to James first. "Sip it slowly," he advised. "There's not much." While James drank, Owen took Ruby aside. "His ribs might be broken," he said quietly, "and he could have internal injuries. He needs a doctor." "The nearest one is back in Sweetwater," Ruby replied, her heart sinking. "We lost the horses, and even if we had them, James couldn't ride that far." Owen nodded grimly. "I know. At first light, I'll try to find our mounts or borrow some from the rangers if they're still around. For now, we should all get some rest." He insisted Ruby take the only chair that looked sturdy enough to support weight, while he settled on the floor near the door, his back against the wall and his revolver in his lap. Despite her exhaustion, Ruby found sleep elusive. James dozed fitfully on the cot, occasionally groaning in pain. Owen maintained his vigilant posture, though his eyes were closed. "You should sleep," he said softly, surprising her by being awake. "I can't," Ruby admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that tunnel collapsing." Owen opened his eyes to study her in the dim lamplight. "That was too close. For a moment I thought that we wouldn't make it out," Ruby finished when he trailed off. He nodded. "I should never have brought you into that mine." "You didn't bring me," Ruby corrected gently. "I insisted on coming, and if I hadn't, James might still be in there or worse." "You're braver than most men I've known, Ruby Parker." "I was terrified the entire time," she confessed. "Being afraid doesn't make you any less brave." Owen's voice was soft in the darkness. "It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear that counts." Ruby felt warmth bloom in her chest at his words. No one had ever spoken to her that way, as if she were capable of true courage rather than just feminine fortitude. "What happens now?" she asked. "After we get James to a doctor?" "Blackwell's still out there," Owen replied, his expression hardening. "According to Harker, he's heading for Mexico with whatever plans they were talking about." "My investigation," James murmured from the cot, surprising them both. He struggled to sit up, wincing. "The land deals, the railroad, all of it goes deeper than I realized." "You should rest," Ruby insisted. James shook his head stubbornly. "You need to know this, both of you." He took a labored breath. "Blackwell isn't just an outlaw. He's working for someone powerful, someone with political connections who stands to make a fortune from the new railroad routes." Owen leaned forward intently. "Who?" "Senator Howard Thornton." James's voice was barely above a whisper. "He's been using Blackwell's gang to drive settlers off land along the proposed route. Once they're gone, shell companies buy the properties for a fraction of their worth. When the railroad comes through, the value increases tenfold. And Thornton profits," Owen finished grimly. "That explains why Blackwell has been so hard to catch. He has protection from the top." "I found documents," James continued weakly. "Maps showing the planned route, letters between Thornton and Blackwell, bank records. I hid them before they caught me." "Where?" Ruby asked. "False bottom in my trunk at home. I didn't tell them, no matter what they did." James closed his eyes, exhaustion overtaking him again. "That's why they wanted the ransom. Blackwell was buying time to clear out and head south while Thornton covered their tracks. Ruby looked at Owen, seeing the same determination in his eyes that she felt. "We have to stop them." "We will," he promised. "But first, we get your brother to safety." Dawn came too slowly for Ruby's liking. James's condition had worsened overnight, his breathing becoming labored and a fever setting in. Owen had gone outside at first light to scout the area. He returned with unexpected good news. Rangers are still searching the area. They've set up a temporary camp about a mile from here. They have a wagon and can transport James to the doctor in San Angelo. It's closer than Sweetwater. Relief flooded through Ruby. Thank God. Within the hour, 2 Texas Rangers arrived at the line shack with a wagon. They helped load James carefully onto a makeshift stretcher, his face gray with pain despite his attempts to hide it. "I'm Captain Dalton," introduced the older of the 2 Rangers, a weathered man with a salt and pepper mustache. "We've been after Blackwell's gang for months. Found evidence at their camp that confirms your brother's story about Senator Thornton." "Did you capture any of them?" Owen asked. Dalton's expression turned grim. "4 dead, 3 captured, including a man named Harker. The rest scattered. No sign of Blackwell himself." "He's heading for Mexico," Owen said, "so our prisoners indicated. We've sent riders to alert Rangers along the border." Dalton studied Owen thoughtfully. "Marshal Whitlock, your reputation precedes you. We could use your help with this operation." Owen glanced at Ruby before responding. "I need to see Miss Parker and her brother safely to San Angelo first." "Of course. My men will escort them. The doctor there is good. Your brother will be in capable hands, madam." Ruby watched the silent communication that passed between the 2 lawmen, understanding what wasn't being said. After James was safe, Owen would join the Rangers in pursuing Blackwell. The journey to San Angelo took most of the day. James drifted in and out of consciousness, his fever worsening despite Ruby's attempts to cool him with damp cloths. Owen rode beside the wagon, his presence a constant reassurance. The doctor in San Angelo confirmed James had 3 broken ribs and a severe concussion, along with numerous cuts and bruises. But after a thorough examination, he assured Ruby there appeared to be no life-threatening internal injuries. "He's young and strong," the doctor said. "With proper rest and care, he should make a full recovery, but it will take time, several weeks at minimum." Ruby thanked him, relief making her light-headed. While James slept under the influence of laudanum, she stepped outside the doctor's office to find Owen in quiet conversation with Captain Dalton. Both men fell silent as she approached. Owen's expression told her everything she needed to know. "You're going after Blackwell," she said simply. Owen nodded. Captain Dalton received word that he was spotted crossing into Mexico near Eagle Pass. A group of Rangers is preparing to pursue. "When do you leave?" "First light tomorrow." Owen's blue eyes held her steadily. "I have to go, Ruby. Blackwell has to answer for what he's done." "I know." Ruby fought to keep her voice even. Will you come back after?" Something flickered in his expression, hope perhaps, or longing. "Would you want me to?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I would." Owen stepped closer, taking her hands in his. They were rough and calloused, but incredibly gentle. "Then I will. You have my word." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Ruby stood on the boardwalk outside the hotel where she'd taken a room near the doctor's office. Owen and 5 Rangers were preparing to ride out, checking weapons and supplies one final time. Owen approached her, hat in hand. He looked formidable in the early light, every inch the U.S. Marshal on a mission. But his eyes, when they met hers, were soft. "I've arranged for you and James to stay at the hotel as long as necessary," he said. The owner is a friend of Captain Dalton's. Thank you. Ruby twisted her hands nervously. How long will you be gone? Hard to say. Could be weeks. I'll look after James until he's well enough to travel home. Then I'll wait there, in Sweetwater. Owen nodded, his expression solemn. Ruby, I can't promise. She pressed her fingers gently to his lips, silencing him. Don't make promises you might not be able to keep. Just be careful. To her surprise, Owen caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, sending a tremor through her entire body. I believe in keeping my word, Ruby Parker. Remember that. Then he was mounting his horse and riding away with the Rangers, leaving Ruby with a curious mixture of hope and fear in her heart. The next 3 weeks passed slowly. James improved steadily under the doctor's care, though he remained weak and tired easily. Ruby split her time between nursing her brother and helping at the local school, where the teacher had gratefully accepted her assistance with the overflowing classroom. News from Mexico was scarce and often contradictory. One report claimed Blackwell had been captured, another that he'd escaped into the mountains. Of Owen, there was no word at all. By the 4th week, James was well enough to travel by stage. Ruby had sent a telegram to Sweetwater, informing the school board of her imminent return. Their response had been terse, but welcoming her position remained open. The journey home was difficult for James, who still suffered pain from his healing ribs. But as the stage rolled into Sweetwater, Ruby felt a curious sense of both homecoming and disappointment. The town looked exactly as they'd left it, yet everything had changed. Sheriff Hanson met them at the stage station, his expression sheepish. Miss Parker, Mr. Parker, good to see you both back safe and sound. Ruby acknowledged him coolly, unable to forget how he'd dismissed her concerns. There's been some excitement while you were gone, the sheriff continued, helping James down from the stage. Texas Rangers came through last week. Arrested Mr. Peterson from the Mercantile. Turns out he was one of Blackwell's informants, and Frank Dawson too. We know about Frank, James said grimly. He was there when they beat me. The sheriff had the grace to look ashamed. I owe you both an apology. Should have listened to you, Miss Parker. Ruby's response was interrupted by a familiar voice calling her name. She turned to find Mrs. Abernathy, head of the school board, hurrying toward them. Ruby Parker, thank heavens you're back. The children have been asking for you daily. Will you be ready to resume your duties on Monday? The normalcy of the question struck Ruby as almost absurd after everything she'd experienced. Yet part of her welcomed the return to routine, to the simple joy of teaching. Yes, Mrs. Abernathy, I'll be there Monday morning. Life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. James recovered enough to return to Austin, determined to publish his exposé on Senator Thornton despite continued threats. The story created a political earthquake when it appeared, leading to Thornton's resignation and criminal charges. Ruby resumed teaching, though she found herself changed by her experiences. She was less willing to accept restrictions on her behavior, more inclined to speak her mind. The townspeople, chastened by their failure to believe her, treated her with new respect. Yet as September gave way to October, and autumn painted the Texas landscape in golds and russets, Ruby found herself watching the horizon, waiting for a rider who never appeared. He's not coming back, she finally admitted to James when he visited for Thanksgiving. It's been 3 months. James studied his sister's face. The Rangers caught Blackwell, you know. It was in all the papers last week. Captured him in a small village in Sonora. Ruby's heart quickened. Was Marshal Whitlock mentioned? No, but these official reports often leave out details. She nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. It's better this way. He has his life, his duty, and I have mine. Is teaching enough for you now, Ruby? After everything you've seen and done, the question lingered in her mind long after James returned to Austin. Was it enough? The routine of lessons and school functions that had once satisfied her now felt confining. She found herself writing in the evening stories of adventure and courage that she never showed anyone. December arrived with an unusual cold snap. Children arrived at school bundled in scarves and mittens, their breath fogging in the chilly classroom until the stove warmed the air. Ruby was dismissing her students one Friday afternoon when Sheriff Hanson appeared at the schoolhouse door. "Miss Parker, there's someone asking for you at the hotel, says it's important." Her heart leaped, then settled. If it had been Owen, the sheriff would have said so. "Thank you, Sheriff, I'll go directly." The Grand Hotel was Sweetwater's finest establishment, which wasn't saying much for a frontier town. Ruby entered the modest lobby, glancing around uncertainly. "Miss Parker," the desk clerk gestured toward the small sitting area, "your visitor is waiting over there." Ruby turned, and the world seemed to stop. Owen Whitlock stood by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the late afternoon light. He was thinner than she remembered, with a new scar above his right eyebrow and a weariness in his stance that hadn't been there before. But his eyes, those remarkable blue eyes, lit up when they found hers. "Owen," she breathed, hardly believing the evidence of her own senses. "Ruby." He crossed the room in 4 long strides, stopping just short of touching her. "I'm sorry it took so long. You came back." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I gave you my word." They stood for a long moment, drinking in the sight of each other. Ruby noticed the U.S. Marshal's badge was missing from his vest. "Your badge," she said, confused. Owen's smile was soft but tinged with sadness. "I resigned my commission." "Why?" "The Blackwell case is closed. Silas Blackwell was killed resisting arrest 3 weeks ago. Most of his gang is either dead or in prison. Senator Thornton will stand trial in the spring." He hesitated. "With the case over, I had to decide what comes next." "And what did you decide?" Ruby hardly dared breathe as she asked the question. "That depends on you." Owen took her hands in his, just as he had that morning in San Angelo. "I've spent 10 years chasing outlaws across the frontier, never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home. Never allowed myself to think about a different kind of life." Ruby's heart hammered against her ribs. "And now I'm thinking maybe it's time for something new." His eyes searched hers. "The Rangers offered me a position. Based in Austin, overseeing investigations rather than riding the trails myself. It would mean settling in one place." "Austin is a fine city," Ruby said carefully, uncertain where this was leading. "It is, and only a day's ride from Sweetwater." Owen's grip on her hands tightened slightly. "Unless." "Unless what?" "Unless the schoolteacher might consider relocating to Austin herself. I hear they have excellent schools there, always need good teachers." Ruby stared at him, hardly daring to hope she understood his meaning. "Are you asking me to move to Austin?" "I'm asking if you might consider a future that includes me in it," Owen said simply. "Because these past months have shown me that my future needs you in it, Ruby Parker." Joy bubbled up inside her, too immense to contain. "Owen Whitlock, are you courting me?" A smile broke across his face, transforming it. "Very badly, it seems. I'm out of practice." He took a deep breath. "Yes, Ruby, I'm asking for the honor of courting you properly, if you'll have me." Ruby answered by standing on tiptoe and pressing her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but filled with promise. "I believe that's a yes," Owen murmured when they parted, his eyes alight with happiness. "It is," Ruby confirmed, smiling up at him. "Though I must warn you, I'm not the same schoolteacher you met last summer. I've become quite scandalously independent." "I wouldn't want you any other way." Owen tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch reverent. "You're extraordinary, Ruby Parker, the bravest, most determined woman I've ever known." "You believed in me when no one else would," she reminded him softly. "How could I not fall in love with you for that?" Owen's expression grew serious. "I want to do more than believe in you. I want to build a life with you, a partnership. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Outside the hotel window, the first snowflakes of winter began to drift down, dusting Sweetwater with white. But inside, wrapped in Owen's embrace, Ruby had never felt warmer or more certain of her path forward. Some people searched their whole lives for someone who truly saw them, who believed in them without question or reservation. Ruby Parker had found that person in the most unlikely of circumstances when no one believed her story, but a marshal said, "I believe every word you say." Now, standing in his arms in the fading December light, she knew their story was just beginning. Spring came to Austin in a riot of bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, transforming the hills surrounding the growing city into a canvas of color. Ruby Parker, soon to be Ruby Whitlock, stood on the porch of their newly purchased cottage on the outskirts of town, breathing in the scent of wildflowers and possibility. 6 months had passed since that December reunion in Sweetwater. 6 months of courtship, of learning each other's habits and histories, of building a life together piece by piece. Ruby had resigned her teaching position after the winter term, accepting a similar role at Austin's expanding school for the fall semester. Owen had settled into his position with the Rangers, his experience and integrity quickly earning him the respect of his colleagues. James had recovered fully from his ordeal and had been instrumental in the prosecution of Senator Thornton. His career as a journalist was flourishing, his exposé having established him as one of the most respected investigative reporters in Texas. "Penny, for your thoughts." Owen's voice came from behind her as his arms encircled her waist. Ruby leaned back against his solid chest. "Just thinking about how much has changed since last summer, how different life is now. Better different, I hope." There was a note of vulnerability in his question that touched her heart. Ruby turned in his embrace. "The best different. I never imagined I could be this happy." Owen's smile was tender as he brushed a stray curl from her face. "1 week until the wedding. Any second thoughts?" "Not a single one," Ruby assured him. "Though I still think James is going overboard with the preparations. We agreed on a simple ceremony." Owen laughed. "Your brother is determined this will be the social event of the season. Can't blame him for wanting to celebrate. We've all earned a bit of happiness after everything." The everything went largely unspoken between them now, though neither would ever forget the harrowing days at Devil's Ridge. The nightmares had faded for Ruby, though occasionally she still woke gasping from dreams of collapsing tunnels and gunfire. On those nights, Owen would hold her close, his strength and steadiness a balm to her troubled spirit. And on the nights when he tossed restlessly, haunted by his own demons from years of dangerous work, she would soothe him with gentle words and touches. They healed each other, day by day, building something stronger than either had been alone. "I picked up your dress from Mrs. Collier," Owen mentioned, changing the subject. "It's hanging in the spare room. Wouldn't want to risk bad luck by seeing it before the big day." Ruby smiled at his adherence to tradition. "Did you also pick up your new suit?" "I did, though I still think my regular clothes would have been fine." "Owen Whitlock, you are not getting married in a work shirt and trail-worn trousers, even if it is a small ceremony." He gave an exaggerated sigh. "Yes, madam. Always did say you were the one giving the orders in this partnership." Ruby laughed and swatted his arm playfully. "And don't you forget it." Their banter was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. James rode into view, waving enthusiastically from atop his chestnut gelding. "There's my favorite sister and soon-to-be brother-in-law," he called, dismounting with the easy grace that had returned with his full recovery. "I'm your only sister," Ruby reminded him as he bounded up the porch steps. "Details, details." James embraced her warmly, then clasped Owen's hand. "Beautiful day for wedding preparations. The flowers have been ordered, the minister is confirmed, and the hotel has promised their finest spread for the reception." "James, we said small and simple," Ruby protested. "And it will be," her brother assured her, "by Austin standards anyway. I can't help it if half the Texas Rangers want to attend, plus the governor and most of the newspaper staff." Owen chuckled at Ruby's expression. "Might as well surrender, Ruby. Your brother is determined to see us properly celebrated." "Fine," she conceded with mock exasperation. "But I draw the line at dancing. My skills are limited to schoolroom recess supervision." "I'm sure Owen will be happy to lead," James teased. "For a man who can track outlaws across 3 states, surely a simple waltz isn't too challenging." Owen's face suggested he might prefer facing armed bandits to a ballroom floor, causing both Parker siblings to laugh. The week leading to the wedding passed in a blur of final preparations. Ruby found herself swept up in the excitement despite her initial resistance to fanfare. The community had embraced them, both Owen as the righteous lawman who had helped bring down a corrupt senator, and Ruby as the courageous schoolteacher who had refused to be silenced. Their story had even made the newspapers, though Ruby had insisted on keeping certain details private. Some moments between them were too precious to share with the world. On their wedding day, the small chapel was filled with wildflowers and sunlight. Ruby wore a gown of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant, like the woman herself. James walked her down the aisle, his face alight with pride. But it was Owen's expression as she approached that Ruby would remember for the rest of her days. The look of absolute wonder and devotion in those blue eyes nearly stopped her heart. "You are so beautiful," he whispered as she reached his side. "So are you," she replied, taking in his tall figure in the new charcoal suit, his blonde hair neatly trimmed for the occasion. Their vows were traditional but spoken with profound sincerity. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen's kiss was tender yet promised so much more, bringing a flush to Ruby's cheeks and a few good-natured whoops from the Rangers in attendance. The reception at Austin's Grand Hotel was indeed grander than Ruby had envisioned, but she found she didn't mind. Surrounded by friends both old and new, with Owen's hand warm in hers and his eyes rarely leaving her face, she savored every moment of their celebration. "Mrs. Whitlock," Owen murmured in her ear as they shared a quiet moment between well-wishers. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Ruby agreed, her heart full, "though I'll still be Miss Parker at school. As long as you're Mrs. Whitlock at home." His voice held a note of possession that sent a delicious shiver through her. "Always," she promised. Later, as they prepared to leave the reception for their wedding night at the hotel's finest suite, a gift from James, Ruby found herself momentarily overcome with emotion. "What is it?" Owen asked gently, noticing the tears in her eyes. "I'm just grateful," she managed. "A year ago, I thought my life was set in its course. Teaching, looking after James, growing old alone someday. I never imagined any of this." Owen cupped her face in his hands. "I never imagined it either. Then a brave schoolteacher stumbled into my path, demanding justice when everyone else turned away. How could I not fall in love with her?" "I'm glad you believed me that day," Ruby whispered. "I'm glad you gave me a reason to stay," Owen replied. "To build something permanent for the first time in my adult life." As he led his bride through the crowd of well-wishers toward their future together, Owen Whitlock reflected on the curious workings of fate. He had spent a decade pursuing justice across the frontier, never allowing himself attachments or dreams beyond the next case. Then, a chance encounter in a dusty Texas town had changed everything. In believing Ruby Parker's story, he had found his own. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the garden of the Whitlock home on the outskirts of Austin. Ruby watched from the porch as Owen swung their 3-year-old son Thomas onto his shoulders, the boy's squeals of delight carrying on the spring breeze. Nearby, their 1-year-old daughter Elizabeth sat determinedly in the grass, her chubby fingers reaching for a butterfly that had unwisely landed within her grasp. "Tommy, be careful with your father's bad shoulder," Ruby called, though she knew Owen would never complain, no matter how much his old injury from a Ranger operation 2 years ago might trouble him. "He's fine," Owen assured her, trotting around the yard with Thomas bouncing and giggling above him. "Strong as a horse, this old lawman." Ruby smiled, her hand absently moving to her rounded belly where their 3rd child grew. Another 2 months, and their family would expand again, a prospect that filled her with joy rather than trepidation. They had built a good life together, a partnership of equals supporting each other's dreams. Owen had been promoted to captain within the Rangers, his expertise in tracking criminal organizations proving invaluable as Texas continued to grow and change. Though he no longer rode the dangerous trails of the frontier, his work remained meaningful and respected. Ruby had taught for 2 years before the birth of Thomas, then made the decision to pursue her long, dormant dream of writing. Her first collection of frontier stories had been published the previous year to modest but encouraging success. She balanced her writing with motherhood, finding unexpected inspiration in the daily adventures of family life. James visited often, bringing stories from his travels as one of the country's most respected journalists. He remained unmarried, claiming his work was spouse enough, though Ruby suspected a certain widowed newspaper editor in San Francisco might eventually change his mind. Mail came, Owen announced, setting Thomas down and retrieving several letters from his pocket as he climbed the porch steps. "One from your brother in Washington. Seems the congressional hearings on railroad regulation are proceeding well." Ruby took the envelope eagerly. James had been covering the hearings that had resulted, in part, from his exposé on corrupt land practices years earlier. His work continued to make a difference, something that filled her with pride. "And this one's for you," Owen added, handing her a second envelope. "From Harper's Weekly." Ruby's breath caught. She had submitted a story to the prestigious publication months ago, but had nearly given up hope of hearing back. "Open it," Owen encouraged, scooping up Elizabeth as she crawled determinedly toward the porch steps. With trembling fingers, Ruby broke the seal. Her eyes scanned the letter once, then again to be certain she understood correctly. "They're publishing my story," she whispered, hardly believing the words. "And they want to know if I have others to submit for consideration." Owen's face split into a proud grin. "Of course they do. Didn't I tell you your writing was something special? You might be slightly biased," Ruby teased, though her heart swelled with his unwavering belief in her talents. "Biased, yes. Wrong, never." Owen leaned down to kiss her, Elizabeth squirming between them and Thomas tugging at his father's trousers to be included. Ruby laughed, making room for their son in the family embrace. These were the moments she treasured most, the simple joy of being loved and believed in, of building a life filled with purpose and connection. That evening, after the children were asleep, Ruby and Owen sat together on the porch swing, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance across the yard. His arm wrapped around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. They shared a companionable silence born of deep understanding. "Do you ever miss it?" Ruby asked softly. "The life you had before, the freedom of the trail, the adventure?" Owen considered the question seriously, as he did all her questions. "Sometimes I miss certain parts," he admitted. "The open country, the simplicity of having just one purpose to focus on." His hand moved to cover hers where it rested on her belly. "But I wouldn't trade this life we've built for anything in this world." "Nor would I," Ruby agreed. "Though sometimes I wonder what that frightened schoolteacher would think if she could see herself now a mother of soon-to-be 3, a published writer, married to the most stubborn lawman in Texas." Owen chuckled. "She'd likely be scandalized, but I think she'd also be proud of how far she's come. Thanks to you believing in me when no one else would." "No," Owen corrected gently. "Thanks to you believing in yourself enough to fight for the truth, even when everyone doubted you. I just recognized what was already there." Ruby turned her face up to his, still amazed after 5 years at the depth of love she saw in his eyes. "We recognized each other, I think. Two people who needed exactly what the other had to offer." "Still do," Owen murmured, lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that held all the passion of their early days and all the depth of the years they'd shared since. Inside their home, the future slept peacefully in small beds adorned with handmade quilts. Outside, the Texas night unfurled its starry canvas over a land that continued to change and grow. And on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, Ruby and Owen Whitlock embraced the life they had forged together, a life built on courage, justice, and the transformative power of being truly believed. For Ruby Parker Whitlock, that long-ago day in Sweetwater when a tall Marshal had said, "I believe every word you say," had been more than just a moment of validation. It had been the beginning of a journey that led her to discover strengths she hadn't known she possessed, dreams she hadn't dared to voice, and a love she hadn't believed possible. In the end, that was the greatest gift they had given each other, the courage to believe in themselves, in each other, and in the power of their shared story.